All right. Welcome, everybody, to the July Dance Talk. Today, I'm happy to introduce Jim Slotta and Stian Håklev from the University of Toronto as our speakers. Jim is Associate Professor with the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning in the Center for Science, Mathematics and Technology Education. Stian is a PhD candidate and about to defend his dissertation entitled From Seminar to Lecture to MOOC, Scripting and Orchestration at Scale. So good luck with that in a couple of days. Today, Jim and Stian are going to talk about scripting and orchestration at scale, new frontiers in pedagogy for large online courses. If you are watching this stream live, as usual, feel free to submit questions through the Q&A tool during the talk, and we are going to address those questions after the presentation. So now, without further ado, I will hand over to Carolyn for some further introductions, and then we can get started with the talk.
Okay, great. Yes, so I've known Jim now for almost a decade and a half, and I've always been really impressed with the stance he takes in multiple research communities, where he always is at the cutting edge or even bleeding edge with really innovative ideas, challenging the current thinking of the time. In addition to the great research that he's done in multiple contexts, most recently in MOOCs, he also has been a leader in the International Society of the Learning Sciences, where he has most recently been leading the Technology Committee and is responsible for the fact that we now have a new website that's up and doing a lot of work for the society that we were struggling with for a while. So we're very, very thankful for the work that Jim has done. The talk that he and Stian will give today is related to a symposium that Jim organized for the recent International Conference of the Learning Sciences, which took place in Singapore. And I was really impressed with the work that he presented in that context. I thought it fits and synergizes so nicely with current directions in this dance community, and so I thought it would be extremely valuable to bring him here to talk to all of you. So with that, I'll very happily turn it over to Jim and Stian.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn, and congratulations finishing your presidency of the Society this year. It's been a pleasure to get to know you more through that shared experience. The work today that we'll present is the culmination of a large, arc of a project, and it is central to Stian's dissertation study. And I'd say there's several big ideas in the work. In my mind, relevant to today's talk, there would be two that are quite salient. One of them is this kind of theoretical and pedagogical basis for the MOOC that we will present to you. This idea that we had a deep structure to what we were trying to achieve in the design of the MOOC. And the other one is the technological kind of innovations that we had to develop, or that we wanted to develop, in order to make that theoretical grounding a reality. So what I'll do is I'll begin the talk today just giving you a background and context of what the MOOC was about and what was our motivation behind the work, and then I'll pass it off to Stian, who will lead you through some discussion about the specifics, and particularly the technological aspects that he has to take a lot of pride and credit for achieving. So that's our brief orientation. And this is an interesting word cloud for you to try to guess what it means on the front page. You'll learn more about it shortly. So what I'll do is I'll start off talking about in-service teachers. This is a unique professional context. It's also kind of a unique thing for MOOCs. There have been other in-service courses for teachers that were MOOCs, and certainly when we began this one, we were one of the first. And it's provided a nice context for how we developed this one. I'll talk a little bit about the theoretical perspective that was central to our thinking about how to design the specifics of the MOOC, and then kind of overview the design, and then I'll hand it off to Stian, who will talk a lot about the scripting and design features and technological aspects at the end we'll give a discussion. So the MOOC itself was an edX MOOC offered from the University of Toronto. It's titled Teaching with Technology and Inquiry, an open course for teachers. And it was right from the outset, we decided that to reach this particular customer of people, we would need to have not just a research voice, but also a practitioner voice. We would need to have substantial representation from the school community. So I had a co-instructor in my right from the beginning of Rosemary Evans, who's the school principal at a nearby lab school called University of Toronto Schools, where I had done quite a bit of research in the past. So she and I met together with Stian and a big group of others to put together this design, and it ran last summer, July 2015. So just to talk a little about teacher development, you know, those of us who have been involved with teachers as part of our research, educational research, you come to know that those who are in pre-service, who are getting ready to teach, have one set of learning challenges and things that we need to try to get them to deeply digest. Those who are already out there and in service, they have an incredible range of existing knowledge, understandings, practices, and we could say epistemological commitments. They have a certain way of thinking about learning and about teaching. And this, from a researcher or an educational research perspective, it provides a context for anything that we'd like to do to try to introduce new ways of thinking or to help them adopt new approaches in their classroom. It's not easy to do because, as you may know, teaching is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. There are probably harder, but it's certainly one of the most sort of ill-defined and many kind of hidden work aspects that teachers are doing. They're usually marking, you know, at night, on the weekends. They're bringing their job home with them, and they're exhausted at the end of the school year, typically ready for a break over the summer. So to find a time that's really convenient to help them think deeply about learning and change their practice is very tough to do. It's very tough to organize, you know, the timing of it so that not every teacher is ready to go right in late June or early July or late August. And as well, they're coming from all over the map in terms of what they're teaching, which kind of students they're teaching, what the school context they're teaching in. So we had a very interesting space to be targeting in our MOOC design. The concept of the MOOC from the beginning was to integrate technology and inquiry into instruction. This is a topic that I have in my own pre-service teaching here at University of Toronto. I've run a course for a decade on helping, you know, those who have not yet entered practice think about how they will integrate inquiry and technology into their lesson designs. And we developed over that period a deep structure for that pre-service course that, in fact, informed the design of our MOOC. So when Stian joined my research group, and he got me excited about trying to think big thoughts about MOOCs and large online courses, an obvious move that we could make was to scale this pre-service course that I had been teaching to a larger audience. And we began actually by scaling it in-house here at University of Toronto, where we tripled the size of the course to take it from a 25-person sort of seminar related studies course to a larger lecture-oriented 75 to 80-person course. And that actually was a large scaling job that involved some pedagogical tweaks, and it involved really kind of going back to our theoretical structure. I designed that course according to my own research interests, which have to do with engaging, you know, learners as an inquiry community. So I essentially had my class adopt my own theoretical perspective, and I'll present that next, but basically we scaled that up into the larger course, and then we scaled it up into the MOOC. Just at the bottom here of the slide, you see persistent professional community. Part of this perspective of mine, my research, is the notion of a knowledge community. This is a community that kind of benefits from being a sharing, knowledge sharing group. So you can imagine them building a wiki and all benefiting from their wiki contributions in such a way that they could never have achieved that resource alone. And if you can conceptualize a community as a course, students as a community, you can imagine designing a curriculum where they really do, through user-contributed content and reuse and building on materials, come to identify as a learning community, and that learning community provides the sort of theoretical basis for the design of the learning. In our case, we wanted to essentially, for in-service teachers, one of the keys that the professional development research community has found is that to really get teachers to change their classroom practice, they need to try stuff out. They need to design and to think, and we call that reflective practice. They need to do small changes to what they're doing in the classroom and then decide whether those worked or not. They also need to be with those who teach the same topics, and sort of birds of a feather, and we see here organized by special interest groups. So in our MOOC, we were targeting any way that we could find, knowing that we weren't going to catch the teachers during their actual school year, but some way for them to really be reflective about practice and to be in a tightly defined user group that was related to their own interests. So here's a quick picture of the theoretical model that drove the design of all of our materials. So you have lots of arrows and boxes without getting too deeply into what any of them are about. You see the green cylinder at the top is the community knowledge base. This could be any sort of digital space. In our case, it was a mix of things, wikis, pools of resources that were tagged, and other kinds of knowledge elements, designs that teachers made of lessons. These all got added into this knowledge base. In the middle of the purple square are these scaffolded inquiry activities, and those essentially draw on the knowledge base as a resource, so the learner is aware of the value of the community knowledge and also kind of giving back into that community knowledge. And at the end, you have a kind of emerged these orange circle of accessible learning outcomes. So as you're designing the curriculum according to this KCI model, you have to essentially create these purple rectangle inquiry activities that yield accessible outcomes that you can look at the end of the day and say, aha, this is showing me whether or not or how the teachers or the learners in general achieved what I set out to achieve with the design of the course. And this model was the original guide for the design of the pre-service course that I taught here for 10 years. I got students to work as a collective community to build a pool of resources around technology, to use those resources in designing lessons, to critically review them with their peers, and to kind of take up a set of themes each week, building more gradually on the weeks before. So that was what we were sort of building on going forward. So a couple of the main challenges here for applying the KCI model in higher education or even in K-12, where I also do work, is that first of all, the students who come into the course may not think about learning that way. They may not understand themselves as part of a community, and it's important that we have to set we call it the epistemic tone, to make sure they understand that this is going to be a new way of learning, that we're going to have a lot of student-centered and inquiry-oriented learning, but we're also going to have this collective aspect, and really help them understand that there's a progression from one week to the other, that the weeks build on each on the previous, and that there's a bunch of technological supports and scaffolded inquiry and reflection in the process. So these are some of the themes that we addressed in the course. The notion of inquiry and student-centered pedagogy. So I needed pre-service teachers to understand that, and we wanted to make sure that we expressed it deeply to these in-service teachers as well. What does it mean to design an inquiry lesson? The whole concept of lesson design is a big one in pre-service. Once you get out into practice, it's not as common to get any guidance in how to develop lessons and assessments and this sort of thing. So we wanted to get into that. Other themes of collaborative learning, handheld and mobile, the idea of user-contributed content, knowledge construction. We also talked a little bit about inquiry enactment, which includes safety of internet, the ethics reuse of materials, the potential problems, how do you deal with technological problems, and these kind of practice-oriented issues. So here's just a quick look at the pre-service course that started off as a wiki. Here, I think you see it as a Confluence wiki, and it's got the course themes here down the front and syllabi and everything you would expect. And one thing that's interesting is that as part of the way I designed this course, we wanted it to not just come to an end each year. We wanted to sort of hand it off to the next year's cohort. So when students would walk in any given semester, I would say to them, hey, here's this, setting my epistemic tone, I would say this is going to be this kind of course, and by the way, you're inheriting the whole wiki from last year, and they're going to have all of their technological resources, all of their lesson plans, and all of their resources for you to continue to build forward and hand it off to the next year. This was the sort of essence of what we tried to bring in to our MOOC. Here was one of the kind of templates that we used in the pre-service course to help them design a lesson. So this is a geography grade 7 expository writing lesson, and you see here the kind of some of the page headers that we use to try to make sure they stay exactly on task and give us back those accessible learning outcomes, including some sub-scaffolds. So that gets us to our MOOC, and I just have to say that the kind of excitement we had of taking this nicely scaled and sustainable course design from my teaching here at University of Toronto, moving it to a slightly different cohort of in-service teachers, and well, not just slightly, but a rather different cohort, but a massively bigger one. We did not actually know how many there would be, and it wouldn't be as big as some because of the very targeted, narrow definition of our cohort. You know, in-service teachers cuts out a lot of the normal MOOC community. So we weren't sure exactly how many we would get. We ended up getting thousands. And you'll learn more about the details of that shortly. But we essentially took and mapped the entire pedagogy from the pre-service course into this one. And that involved creating some involved a lot of simplifications, first of all, because the learning contexts are not the same as when you would come to a course in a higher education context as part of a degree program versus when you're coming to a MOOC and you might not have quite the level of drive, of need, of the kind of commitment. You wouldn't have the temporal commitments where in a regular university course you really have a time of day for a set number of hours. So we knew we were building for a slightly, let's say, more varied range of participation patterns. And yet we also wanted to engage the deep participants is sort of giving them as much line as they could take in terms of creating and developing lessons and really engaging with the materials. So when we were designing our MOOC, we were guided by the KCI model. We were heavily influenced by the material that we had from the pre-service course, but we really did kind of start fresh and say, how are we going to translate this into weekly themes that engaged the teachers, that allowed for a range of different participation levels, and that leveraged the community, the wider community. So for example, if I had thousands of participants, how can that become a sort of a cloud or a resource for helping, let's say, to smaller groups of people design lessons within a very specific topic area? And so we came to this idea of special interest groups. Stian has done a lot of interesting thinking about, the almost ironic nature of large cohorts, that they actually allow for very tightly defined special interest groups. Only with thousands of teacher participants could we get 150 who were interested in elementary art education, for example. So this was a wonderful feature of the course, and we had a lot of technical challenges that we had to achieve to let that work smoothly, to find out who were the actual specific cohorts that we could define, and to enable them to join and to find each other and to interact tightly with each other. I'd say so I think what I've talked about just now is the theoretical background, the motivation for the course, and the basic design context of the course. From this forward, where I think we really want to focus is on the concepts of scripting and orchestration. So as you begin to define, at least within the learning sciences, there's a strong sort of community of scholars who are interested in the notion of scripting, which has to do with kind of specifying the flow of activities, materials, roles, learning goals, and the role of the instructor and kind of various scaffolding environments, and orchestration, which has to do with actually making that script come true. And so from this point forward in the talk, I think a lot of what you'll hear about is the scripting and orchestration of this MOOC and how we went about that. I think I'm kind of at the end of, near the end of my slides, but the kind of overall thing, the flow that we'll describe. First, a very innovative trick that we developed was this idea of a pre-course space called the Teacher Lounge. So we knew that these teachers, a lot of them were signing up early in June, and that they were hungry for something to do, and that the main course didn't start until mid-July or early July. I can't remember exactly when it started, but we had a few weeks to kind of work with this let's say human potential that was sitting around, you know, watching their counter tick down to when the MOOC would start. And so we actually developed some important knowledge collection activities for them to do during that Teacher Lounge. One of them was to do a survey that actually gave us a lot of the information we used, the metadata about the users, to group them and to understand how to send them materials and this sort of thing. Another one was to populate a resource pool with their favorite technologies for learning. And so we started engaging them early on as a community and helping that actually helped make real the notion that we were going to benefit from our peers in this course. And then we did this kind of 6-week, you know, recurring script where each week followed the same pattern, but also had progress, and there was a sort of macro scripts that sort of grew over the 6 weeks. During that part, there was an important split of participants, and I will say, that Carolyn has also played around with this notion where you actually ask people, do you want to go deeper or do you want to stay in this kind of more basic level of participation? And we did that to them in our course. We asked them, like, there's a deeper thing you can get involved in, which is lesson design. If you want to do that, then just keep clicking forward. If you don't, then don't worry. It doesn't have anything to do with your assessment on the course. But so we had these two strands, the foundation strand and the design strand, and Stian is going to tell you a lot more about how those worked, because we didn't want them to be separate and not influencing each other. We wanted to use the much larger cohort in the foundation strand to sort of be a resource for the more focused workers in the design strand, and we wanted the products of the design strand to come up as important, you know, inquiry resources for those in the foundation strand. So that's my piece, and I'll sit here while Stian talks, and then I'll be here for the questions and discussion at the end. I'm going to leave it him now to sort of talk to you about the very, very interesting technical work and actually design and pedagogy work that he was able to lead as part of his doctoral study.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm going to talk first a little bit, a high-level overview of some of the scripts that we designed from a pedagogical perspective, and then I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a deep dive into the actual components that we built. I'm going to show you how it looks on edX Live. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we did it from a technical perspective, because I think a lot of people in this community are interested, already have experience maybe in trying different ways of extending MOOC platforms or adding functionality. So I have a few slides here which are inspired by my doctoral thesis, which will be available within a few months. And in this thesis, I was inspired by Pierre Dillenburg's orchestration graphs, and Dillenburg actually gave a dance talk a little bit earlier. So thinking about these different levels and these different activities. And as Jim just mentioned, we had this pre-course lounge, and that served a few different purposes. The first was just beginning to warm people up to the idea that this was a different kind of learning. This was a knowledge community where we really wanted to have people bring in their experiences, their ideas, and these were mostly in-service teachers or people who were active in education, so they had a lot to bring to the table. We wanted to begin collecting data for our student model, which would help us understand how to organize the course, how to design the groups, because we didn't know who would be joining our course. We didn't know how many, and there was a danger that if we said we're going to have 10 groups and we get 100 people signing up, they'll be too small. If we get 100,000, they'll be too big. And we also wanted to start collecting some of the collectively generated resources. And I'll show you this on edX in a little bit, but basically we connected into edX through LTI, which is a simple protocol, but through that protocol you actually get very little access to information about the students. The only thing you get is the student edX user ID and the edX email. So we don't know who these people are. Even if they have put any kind of information on edX, we don't have access to that information. So the first thing we did was to ask them a bunch of questions. If they wanted to participate in a more, the deeper level of participation in this course, and that's where the tag cloud that you saw on the front page comes from. Students chose folksonomy tags to represent themselves, and we had a database where we started to store information about the students, about their group affiliation, about their interests, about the resources, and so on and so on. Based on this information, we designed a number of special interest groups that were designed both to have a roughly similar number of students in each group, but also to respect the different topic areas. On the left there, you see what I think of as a granularity pyramid, and you could flip it around and put the MOOC at the bottom as well, but either way, you kind of have the whole course community. Then you have the SIGs, and a lot of the interactive activity was happening within the SIGs, but they were also a little bit leaky, so there was information flowing across SIGs. And then within the SIGs, you had these design groups, which we'll look at later. And we actually did a little cleanup of the special interest groups once people had had the chance to join, and we joined a number of the special interest groups to optimize the number of students in each, and you can see that on the right there. As Jim mentioned, we had these two main strands, the foundation strand and the design strand, and what we really wanted to do was to create an interdependence between the strands so that each benefited from each other. It wasn't simply the case of saying, oh, you just want to watch videos, fine, go into your corner and watch videos and don't bother us. Rather, there are ways in which people can contribute that are very low impact for them, but taken as a collective, it actually brings in a lot of value to the community. So if you have 10,000 teachers and you ask them all to submit one useful resource and to rate 3 resources from other teachers, you now have 10,000 resources that are tagged, rated, and commented upon, which is an incredible resource for the community. So this is just a graph showing how there was kind of a flow of resources and feedback and refinement between these two strands. And so the design strand was benefiting from the collective intelligence of the cloud, and the foundation strand was really benefiting from the deep, thoughtful work being done by the design strand. That not only were they exposed to this process, but I think it also really contributed to this semantic, this epistemic shift that we're trying to achieve. That this is a place where knowledge creation happens, you know, it's easy when we've been designing these scripts to kind of keep going down into smaller and smaller groups and doing more and more collaborative work, because the fewer people in the group, it's easier to collaborate rather than just listen. And we want to make sure that it just doesn't go one way, that we have ideas from the small groups filter up, that we have ideas filter across SIGs. And in the resource review script, which we'll actually look at in edX, we had one of this kind of permeability, where you could add a resource and you can specify whether this resource was specific to your discipline. For example, a physics simulation would only be of interest to other physics educators, whereas Google Docs or Pinterest would be usable for any kind of subject area. And so if you tagged it as a general resource, it would be exposed to all the other students. And because we were writing the interfaces and the data models ourselves, we could make those kind of filters and so on, which would have been difficult otherwise. And then the idea that this course isn't a standalone. It doesn't start from a blank slate. It doesn't end by shutting off all the access. Rather, we were feeding in resources from the university courses, from the pre-service courses that had come before, and some of the resources that were generated by this MOOC have been made public to the whole world, but will also be fed into future courses, maybe MOOCs, maybe courses taught at the University of Toronto. And again, that's also a way of supporting that epistemic shift, of seeing students, of having students see that we really value the resource that they generate, and that it's not just busy work, but it's something that's valuable, that they are benefiting from previous generations, and that future generations will benefit from their work. And as we move along the 6 weeks, we have a number of scripts that keep pushing information into the community knowledge base, which is this. I mean, it's a little bit abstract in this graph, but it's the idea of it's somewhere that is persistently available to you as you, for example, work on the lesson design, which becomes progressively more complex. Initially we ask you what is the topic of your lesson, what is your target group, and towards the end we ask you how are you going to evaluate this, how are you going to deal with diversity and ethics. So these are more and more complex questions, and we want there to be a community knowledge base that you can rely upon when you are facing these questions, and we're exposing that knowledge base to you in different ways. And finally, and this was a big shift because in the pre-service course at the University of Toronto, we had a weekly meeting session where students came together for 4 hours, and where we could say that for the last 45 minutes, you go into your small design groups and you sit and you work intensively on coordinating work that you might continue at home. But when you are doing something that's purely online, as we all know, it can be very difficult to for a group that has never met face-to-face to coordinate, especially if they want to do deeply collaborative work. I can add a resource and you can add a resource, and we don't really need to coordinate anything. If we're editing a lesson design document, we need to discuss, we need to make decisions, we need to choose to do something and not do something else. And so what kind of tools can support that kind of collaboration? That's something we thought a lot about, because I don't think there are a lot of examples of MOOCs with persistent teams, where you form a small team that actually works together over the 6 weeks. And we did that, and some of the teams were very successful. And we also thought about how we could create some of the excitement that you get when a lot of people meet and have interesting discussions, and they actually feel like a community, because oftentimes MOOCs can feel very isolating. Even though you're in a MOOC with thousands of people in the discussion forums, you're still just this one person sitting there at any given moment. And so we built this tool to facilitate a large online meeting as kind of the ending of the climax of the course, if you want, and I'll show you that as well. So this is a fairly complex graph, but it's basically all the elements that I already showed you just put into one, and it might be useful to go back, once you've heard this talk, if you want to go and look at how we imagine all these elements really kind of play together to form a single unified course. So that was a very, very quick walkthrough, but hopefully that higher level view will be useful once we look at the specific technology components. And as I said, I will be happy to make these slides available. There will be, in a month or so, there'll be a dissertation with very deep detail about all of these aspects. So how did we do it? Right? There's been a number of attempts at extending MOOC platforms, and there's different approaches. Some people, like Dan Hickey, basically wrote his own platforms from scratch, although he built on Google Course Builder. So he had some kind of a framework, but he basically built it exactly to fit his needs. Other people built fully external apps, but they kind of connected it to the MOOC through a single logon. But really, once you entered that app, you were in a different space. It had menus, it had navigation, and so on. Some people have tried to build X blocks, so more deeply integrated into edX. Our problem with that was that we wanted to run this course on edX.org, and it doesn't, as far as I know, currently support external X blocks. So the way we ended up doing it was using LTI, which is it's basically like an iframe or like a link, The only difference is that it can contain a little bit of authenticated information, typically just a user hash and sometimes the edX user ID and the edX email. And there's also a callback function where optionally the LTI service can send a grade back for that activity. So that's really all it has. However, the way we did this was we designed a bunch of different LTI components, but they were all hosted on the same server, and they were all depending on the same data storage. So one LTI component would know everything that you had done in other LTI components. And that's why we were able to do the things that we did. So this is just a little overview of the edX components on the left that we used. We used the discussion, we used the videos, of course. We used the discussion forums and some of the basic things that they offer. Then we had most of the components that we designed ourselves on our LTI server. And then we used 3 external tools, the Confluence Wiki, Etherpad, and also Google Hangout for the live. And so we had to kind of wrap these because these 3 tools are not aware either of LTI or of what we're trying to do with the student model and the grouping and so on. So we had to kind of wrap them to make that work. Okay, so I'm going to go now to show you how it actually looks. Now, first of all, I want to say that all the code that we wrote, it's open source, it's on GitHub. It's written in Elixir, which is a fairly new and fairly small programming language, but it worked really well for our purposes. So you're welcome to have a look at that. We also, because it's a new language, we also had to build some pieces. For example, there was no LTI library for Elixir yet, so we built that and made that available. Now, this is the course on edX. If you look at the URL bar, this is the live course. So if you went to edX right now, and I'm not sure if you're still able to sign on. You might be. Otherwise, if you already signed on, you could go into the course. And if you came into the course before the course had started, you would go into this week 0 teachers lounge. And after some videos and a little bit of text, they would say, we would like you to take this survey. And with LTI and edX, there's 2 ways of doing it. You can do an iframe, which I'll show you a bunch of examples of later, where the content is actually embedded in the HTML page. Or you can have this button that leads you to an external component. And if you do the external component, you can have the option of also sending the user ID and the password, because the student can choose to click the button and they can actually be asked whether that's okay or not. Whereas if it's an iframe, it will just show up once you enter the page and the student doesn't have a choice. So again, the way we chose to deal with this is you had to go through the survey to access any of the other components, and through the survey we captured your edX user ID and password, and then we'd have that whenever else you came through the hash. So you would go here and you would get to the registration. Again, because we don't have much information about you from the edX site, and also because we want to respect your privacy. Instead of using your edX user ID, we ask you, what do you want us to call you? This will be shown to others, right? And then there's some settings and so on. Now, I want to briefly talk a little bit about some of the tech features we built. I have a background doing a lot of data analysis for MOOCs and also for other courses. And one of the things is in surveys, because first of all, you're designing them in some or something, and it's very difficult to keep track of changes, working on it collaboratively. So I came up with a very simple, I couldn't find a standard for this, so I came up with a very simple text format for specifying a survey. And this is line-based because I wanted to make it easy, A, for someone who doesn't know programming to edit it, and B, to actually do diffs, because that means that you can go, and this is all part of our code base, so you can go and look at how we modified our survey, how we added some options, and the diffs actually look meaningful because it's line-based like this. And based on this text definition, we can then automatically generate the survey that you saw. Now, once we've done that survey, and we now have a lot of information about the student, and so this is just a dump of our student model for Jim Slotta, right? And this is, of course, after he's been using the MOOC for a while, so he's gotten some grades that have been sent back to the edX system. Here's the raw data from the survey, and we know which resources he's been looking at, which group he's part of, what design group he's part of, and so on. And not just for one student, but we know for the whole class. And because we have the definition of this survey, because another thing that was annoying to me as working on data analysis was that I would get the raw data in a CSV file, but now I'd have to spend a lot of time defining this field is an ordered factor, and in this field 0 means yes and 1 means no, and so on, which is data that we all have because we designed the survey in the first place. So this is the kind of thing that now can be generated automatically because we know the definition. So it can be generated automatically, but also this is live data, right? Every time I load this page, it's right up to date. And if this isn't cutting edge computer science or anything like that, but anyone who's been working with edX data and surveys and gathering information know that there's often a fair amount of delay until you get the data, and there's a lot of work that you have to do with the data to get the information out of it. So for us to be able to live see what's happening with the students entering the course and be able to adjust our pedagogy and our design based on that was actually, even though it seems from a technical standpoint not very advanced, to our course design, I think it was a really crucial feature. Now, I talked about designing the special interest groups. So we took the data from the students who signed up before the course had started, and we generated a list of special interest groups. Although we could have automatically placed students in the special interest group that suited their data, we chose to let them choose the SIG. Again, we were able to enforce that so that whenever you would go into a unit, so for example here I'm looking at the personal reflection, and because I haven't yet chosen a special interest group, it says, well, first you have to choose a special interest group, then you can view this resource. So I'm going to choose the higher education special interest group, and I'm going to submit that, and now I'm looking at this reflection. So this is an example of an iframe. Okay, and the cool thing here is, if you didn't know it, you wouldn't even think that this wasn't part of edX, right? It says external resource in parentheses. That's really the only thing that makes it different. And this is a very simple reflection. Now, this is the kind of thing that, again, it's not cutting-edge computer science. Why would we want to build this ourselves? Well, we already had this way of going from a text definition of a survey to the actual survey, to the analysis. So for week 2, we thought, hey, we can add some quantitative questions to this as well, and we can get some very quick feedback. So just based on this very quick definition, we can get a survey that has a few questions, and again, we get this live updated report, and we can get a very quick read on what people are thinking. So just being able to build components like this, let us iterate very, very quickly when we wanted to insert new features into the MOOC and to get very quickly updated feedback from the students. So I talked about the resource script, and the resource script began in the week 0 in the teachers lounge. So after you had done the entry, the survey, you've registered, you've chosen your SIG. We asked you, do you know of any useful resources, right? We just want the name, the URL, a description, and let us know whether this can be used in many different subjects or whether this is specific to a single discipline. And then once you come into week 1, there's a bunch of, we have some videos, we have the reflection that you just saw, we have some discussion forum, and so on. And then we have some inquiry activities. And one of those is, now we want you to look at some resources submitted by other people, and then you could add tags, you could rate it, and we can get another one. There's a Spanish one, and once we've done that, we can go and we can actually explore these resources submitted by other people. Now, the resources I'm looking at right now are the discipline-specific resources for my special interest group, plus the resources that have been tagged as generic, right? So we can look them by tags. We can look at the tag cloud here, look at some academic resources, look at this one in depth, and some people have added some lesson topic ideas. There's some tags here, and there's a folksonomy based on the tags that people have been using. So this is, again, a simple tool, but it really enables us to, across thousands of students, aggregate and organize and explore these resources. And this becomes then part of the knowledge, the community knowledge base for the whole course. And we're actually exposing this resource publicly as well in the future. Now, I talked about bringing resources from the pre-service course at the University of Toronto into the MOOC, and this is an example of this, where we took some of the best lesson designs designed by students at the University of Toronto, and we formatted them a little bit, and so we can explore them here. If I'm interested in languages, and I want to look at this French lesson. And so this is a lesson, we just did a bit of formatting, but this is all work done by University of Toronto students, and there was a comment section. And again, starting the course in week 1 with bringing in these resources is a way of really priming the students for saying, you are going to be doing this as well, and you can do this. This is, and this will be valuable to others. So once students had completed looking at these previous lessons, we asked them, do you have a design idea? What kind of a lesson would you like to design? What kind of problem in your own teaching would you like to look at? So they could submit one here, and then they could come in and select a design idea, join a group, and so on. And once they, so this was the interface for that, but I'm already in a group because, of course, I've done this before. And how do I now go into this group with these people I don't know and actually do meaningful work? And this is where we have this thing we call a collaborative workbench. The idea was to unify all the different tools and resources that students would need to be able to do this very difficult, complex design task with some persistent communication tools with their group. Okay, so there's 2 other members in my group. I could, if there was a green light here, they would be logged on, so I could tell right away. There's a persistent chat, so I could chat with them right now, or I can use it as a notice board and see what they've been talking about while I was gone. I can send them an email, and the email will go through the MOOC server and be anonymized, so they will not get my email address. If they respond to that email, their email will be anonymized, and they will go to everyone. Each week we started on the first tab here with a prompt, and so this is for week 5 because MOOC's been running for a while, where we said, you know, this is week whatever, this is the weekly topic, this is what we want you to do, these are the resources available to you. And then we had this page which gathered the comments and the peer feedback from other students. And we really didn't want the peer reviews to be evaluative, right? We don't really care whether you think this is good or bad or a 1 to 5 scale. We want it to be constructive because these are in progress documents, and so and we want it to be tied to the weekly theme. So if you're talking about collaboration this week and you're reading this in progress design document, then please give them some suggestions about how their design could become more, could incorporate more collaboration, for example, right? And here's an example of peer review is something that edX already features, but we couldn't use that functionality because edX expects you to upload a piece of work before you're allowed to peer review other people's. Whereas we wanted a lot of people who are not participating in the design strand to actually provide peer reviews for a smaller number of groups. So you can see here from one of the early weeks, they got 4 or 5 comments for each of these questions. Then we incorporated Etherpad, a collaborative live editing tool, and this was kind of the internal scratch pad. This was private to the group, and again we had these prompts that we inserted each week relevant to the week, and they can go back and they can look at previous weeks and the work that they did and the things that they wrote. And finally, the wiki is where the work is actually done, that is shown to the world. So this will be, and in this case it is because the MOOC is over, their final lesson design that they've done, and this is what gets displayed to the other students every week for peer review. Now each week we modified the tabs that were available here, and for example in the first week we would insert the resources tab so that you could, without leaving this collaborative workbench, you could go and look at the resources suggested by students in your special interest groups, and maybe there were some that weren't relevant to your design. So we also experimented with using email to connect students who maybe forgot to log in, or also to enhance this sense of synchronicity in the design group, because you really want things to happen a little bit more fluidly than every person logging in once a week and updating. And this is something that we could do because we captured the edX email, we asked them for permission, and we had this student model. So this is a simple experiment with a personalized email where we could send an email to everyone saying you've done a number of resources, we're looking forward to you joining a design group. We could probably have taken this much further, but we didn't end up actually using this functionality a lot. But what became really powerful for the design group was that we had these weekly updates, and this email has a number of functionality. Each design group gets a unique from email address, and if I respond to this email, it will go to all of my group members. So this can be the beginning of a conversation. And then we have these links that have hashed IDs, so that if I click on this link, it will take me directly to my design group. I don't have to go to edX and then log in and then find the link and then go there. And also these unsubscribe links will directly unsubscribe me. Again, I don't have to remember any passwords. So this is one example. And then we also added a social update, so that anytime someone entered your design group, the other members who hadn't unsubscribed would get an email update. And this turned out to be very successful. A large number of people entered the design group when they got this update, and because they wanted to be there at the same time as someone else, and they wanted to be able to chat with someone, to work with someone in the Etherpad, and so on. So you could just click here, and you would be in your design group, and you could then collaborate with someone already there. Finally, the last week, we really felt like there had been, a real community of students who were passionate about their design groups, about their special interest groups, about the work that we were doing in the MOOC. And we wanted the course to somehow end with celebrating that community. And we wanted it to kind of go out with a bang, and not a whimper. So we came up with this idea of doing a live meeting. And we used Google Hangout on Air, which is the same thing we're using right now. But instead of just sending people to the YouTube page, we embedded the YouTube page in this little tool that we created, where you have a live chat on the one side, and then this is inspired by Google Moderator. So anyone can enter a new idea. You can vote it up, and you cannot vote it down. So you can only vote it up. You can add comments, and then the administrator can very easily either archive it, which means it's been addressed, so it's moved to the bottom, but it's not deleted. Or if someone's just writing not relevant stuff, they can trash it. And we did 2 sessions of this Google Hangout for different time zones. Both times we had the instructors, but also some of the MOOC staff and some of the teachers from the University of Toronto schools who had been featured in the weekly videos. And we had about 100 people showing up each time, and I think they really enjoyed it. And they actually asked us why we hadn't done this every week. So that's something to maybe think about in the future. Towards the end, the course is over. We have all these lesson designs. Some of them, of course, many of them were abandoned midway, but some of them stayed to the end. They stayed through 6 weeks of prompts, of feedback, and they developed complete lesson designs, which is not an easy feat in a MOOC with, again, people you've never met, with no real motivation to finish other than the fact that you enjoy creating this knowledge. And so we wanted to celebrate that with this, what we call a gallery walk. So we went through and we chose the ones that are complete. and we expose it. And this is actually public to the world, so you can go in here after this talk and you can have a look at what the students came up with. And there's some great designs here. Finally, we also experimented with some other learning analytics. So this was kind of an overview of the different design groups. So we can see how many members they have. We can see if they're currently online. And we can see how many chat messages they've sent, how many emails, how many reviews they've received, and also how much they've written on the wiki. And we can go directly, for example, here is the one of the most prolific groups, and we can go and look at exactly the wiki that they wrote. Or we can go and look at the collaborative workbench of a group that might need some help, right? So we come in as a visitor to their workbench. And the idea of this tool was to really, because we had a number of community teaching assistants that we assigned to each SIG, and our idea was for them to help out a little bit with the groups. Unfortunately, this tool was built fairly late in the process, and I think it could have been both this tool, but also the way we used the community TAs and the ways we supported groups could have been done much better, and might have had a large impact on how many groups actually completed. Here's just another tool I was experimenting with, which shows all the groups and actually live streams their chat, which maybe isn't very ethical, but this was when we were trying to figure out what was, because it's very difficult as an instructor when you're in a big classroom. You can at least kind of see whether people are talking or reading Facebook or engaged. In the MOOC, it can, when you have if you just have videos, you get some statistics about how many people are watching your videos. But when you have all these different groups, it can feel very difficult to get a sense of what's working and what's not. And so these tools were our attempt at beginning to understand how people were doing. So that's really it. I know this is a very quick overview of a lot of stuff. We're not going to talk in detail about the statistics or anything. There's actually, there are some papers underway. Hopefully will be forthcoming with more detailed analysis. You can look in the one graph there. We kind of tried to show how many people were part of the different tracks. We had an exit survey, and certainly the people who took it were very, very bullish about MOOCs for professional development. Of course, that was 125 people out of the thousands of people who signed up for the MOOC. And we have the 25 completed lesson design projects, right? So we have some open discussion questions, but I think we'll just leave it open for debate and see what things you might want to pick up on. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. So I have to apologize for Carolyn. She had to leave at noon. So we're just going to have this discussion amongst ourselves. And if the audience still has questions, you can submit your questions while we are discussing right now. So at several points, I think you mentioned that there were also technical challenges integrating your own work in the edX platform, and with the amount of data or information you get about the students using LTI. So is there something like a wish list that you have of things that edX should support to make the life easier for researchers like you who work on these environments?
I think there's certain things that we could wish for, but there's also a large space that still needs to be explored in terms of what kind of protocols. I mentioned that on my last slide, which I just skipped by, but LTI in itself is defined. I mean, you could theoretically include any kind of information in the header if you wanted to, but basically it's really used as a single sign-on, and you can get a grade back. And one of the things lacking from our perspective, for example, is the ability to transfer artifacts. You might want to have a Google Doc or Etherpad, and then you want to take the text that people write and you want to put it into a brainstorming tool or a concept mapping tool. Now, the way we did that was, A, we kept all of the data together from our components, and B, we used custom APIs from Etherpad to push data into Etherpad, extract it from Etherpad, push it into the wiki, different API, right? So we hand wrote all that. Is there a way in which but there's no off the shelf that I want edX to implement. That's more of a, I think us as a community have to think about. But I mean, something low hanging that I was wishing for is some APIs from edX's side. For example, we used the discussion forum, and we had the grouping done on our side, but we wanted that reflected in the cohorts in the discussion forum. But there's no API for putting a student into a cohort. So we had to manually upload a CSV file, twice a day, just that would update all the cohort placements, right? Or even integrating with the discussion forum in other ways, like pushing a message, or getting a stream of messages and being able to write some kind of interaction or learning analytics tool that live updates based on that data.
And what about more of a data exchange, more than LTI, allows you to get for each student? So, for example, I think I remember some plans to develop more of a profile feature in edX that allows students to develop richer profiles that also that are available across courses, so not just for a single course. So
I've been saying this for a long time. Like, I would love to know something about my students, before the day zero that they start the course. And I think it would be great for students to be able to have, affinity groups. Let's say, oh, we're 5 people, we're all interested in statistics. Let's all take this MOOC together. Or, you just entered this MOOC. There's 3 people you've been collaborating with previously. Do you want to join up with them? All that kind of stuff, I think, would be very interesting, for sure.
So yeah, I hope that the development.
So far, I feel like a lot of the interesting work around MOOCs has been on the learning analytics side, and with data formats, interchange, all that stuff. And there hasn't been so much on the design side, right? Like there have been people trying it, but I don't feel like there's really interesting conferences or interesting communities of people who are trying. I mean, dance is maybe really good and maybe the only example of people coming together and saying, we want to build better tools, environments, and pedagogies for learning at scale. What software do we need? What protocols do we need? What databases? Where does the logic live, right? If you build an adaptive tutor or an intelligent agent, is that a Lambda function on Amazon somehow that you can hook into? Is it some JavaScript that runs on the edX server? Is it in your external app, right? So there's a lot of, I think, really interesting design, higher level questions here. Because what's really frustrating to me is, we spent a huge amount of time building a lot of this infrastructure, like sending emails, sending personalized emails. Like, you have to build that tool, and then you have it, and you could do so much more interesting things with it than we did. You could really iterate, and that's a whole design project. But how could we package up a lot of the stuff that we built and make it available to others? And right now, it's on GitHub, but I wouldn't say that it's easily accessible to others. And I've been racking my head to think about how I could make it, but it's not an obvious thing. Yeah?
Right, that's a really good point. So I think edX had plans in at least having some kind of a platform with a structured way of communicating what tools, what modules are out there. But so far, I'm at least not aware of any platform that is available to date. So this would be a start, but having a runnable modules that people would just plug in and use in their environments, that would be. I want to go to edX and start a new course and go to the edX App Store and search for forum and see 20 different discussion forums and find the one designed by you guys and say, I want that discussion forum in my course. Right. So like a store or app store or something like that.
But then there's also the question of how much do you specialize on one MOOC platforms, and that makes it more generic versus making something that's really specific to
pretty open, but then So if you talk about Coursera, for example, they also support LTI, I think, but it's much more closed up, so it's probably more difficult to actually get a deeper integration going.
Well, one of the things that a choice that they've made is that they only support separate window. They don't support iframe.
Oh yeah.
That would make a huge difference to us, because one of the wins for us was really that we didn't want a separate application that you went into. I mean, the collaborative workbench was kind of, but that was also why we always put it at the end of a weekly sequence. So after you've done all of the edX stuff, now go into your collaborative workbench and you can kind of stay there until next week. But all of the other activities, they were just, you know, embedded. You see a video, you have a quiz, you do this, you know, you don't even know that you're doing LTI. And that's was really beneficial to us, and I think the students really appreciate it, maybe without knowing it. And that's something that would be much more difficult in Coursera.
So in a couple of talks that we had earlier in this series, and also in the past in our works, we had to deal with coordination difficulties in teamwork. So did you see any particular difficulties the students, the participants had in coordinating their work? And what were their practices in the first place? So how did they actually coordinate their work? Because there are so many ways, and if you provide them with opportunities, they don't necessarily make use of those. So.
Yeah, so a lot of our design actually, I mean, the basic principle design of the curriculum and the pedagogy was you know, put together before the course started, but a lot of the specific implementation and the components and stuff was built as we went along, as we learned more, and that was a really interesting kind of finding. The first week, people in the collaborative groups and the design groups didn't seem to have much problem, because it was more additive. It was you know, brainstorm, add ideas about the kind of lessons you would like to create, and everyone, okay, I'll go into Etherpad and I'll add my ideas. Then the second week, we asked them to choose one. And it was almost like people were too polite, which is maybe the opposite problem that you have on most of the internet, but we had all these teachers who were self-selected to be, you know, collaborative knowledge workers. And so they didn't want to go in there and say, I'm going to just choose one without checking with the team. But they didn't really have a good way of checking with the team.
Right.
And I mean, they had a chat, but again, initially, there wasn't the email functionality. So it was very unlikely that you would be there when someone else were there. So you'd have to post a message, wait for someone else to, and then check again. And of course, most people don't do that. So that's when we started building some of the email functionality, for example. We could have also built, for example, and we talked about building, you know, some kind of a meeting scheduler. You know, you meet at night, and I think that would be, we just didn't get around to it. It wasn't prioritized. I think that would be interesting to experiment with. We even talked about initially, when we published the course, saying, you know, this course will run Wednesday night at 8 to 10 p.m. And, you know, if you can't make it, then don't choose this course. And at that time, you would come, but you might be working in your small group. Or you might, you know, we might have a big live, we could have different kind of things every week, but we kind of know that a large percentage of the course would be online at that time. So I think there's different models that are interesting. What we found in the end was that the social notification, the emails that went out when someone entered the group and let people kind of just ad hoc run to the group and join them, worked very well. They were very popular. A lot of people clicked on those links. And also I think because it was so easy to just click on the link and you were right there. The mailing lists, which I had high hopes for, totally failed. Almost nobody used it. Even initially, we had the button in the interface where you could initiate a conversation. Then we tried to actually send out emails to say, you just need to respond to this email, and it'll go to your group members. And you know, but we introduced this late. We introduced this in week 3 or 4 because we had to build it first, and it's like building a mailing list server from scratch isn't that easy. Or maybe people don't want to bother. I mean, you know, there's more questions than answers here. But I think you're right. I think this is a really key issue if you want to have functioning groups and MOOCs.
So these these are and an echo.
Sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo here, so maybe it's better now. So so these takeaways are very important, I think. So what communication forms should we even offer to the students? And I can imagine that offering them too many is might also be an issue. So do you have any idea how often teams communicated at all? So across all different affordances that you gave them, so how active is communication?
I don't have a number for you. We haven't done that analysis. I've looked at some case studies of the most successful groups, and it still tended to be a roughly weekly pattern. So what kind of distinguished the successful groups wasn't so much that they would log on every day or that they would be very intense, but that they somehow really persisted, and every day, every week they would come in, they would do a little bit of work, and oftentimes, and again, this is more anecdotal, just looking at the most successful groups, it would be 2 people out of maybe the 3 or 4 or 5 that were in the group that really connected and did a lot of the work. And then, of course, and this is hard to analyze, but I know some of the groups also found outside tools. So they would
So that's
our email addresses in our chat, and then, of course, we don't know what they're talking about outside of
right. Also experience. Also in past MOOCs, so participants have created Facebook groups, for example. So we didn't have access to those unless they registered them somehow in the MOOC. So we had a social network there, and they could just link all their external tools in there. But it's also, so if you don't have access to the actual platform, it also makes it more difficult to make use of the data.
Exactly, and like, for example, I mean, if edX had some of these features built in, you could have, and I think, I forgot what it's called, there's a smaller MOOC platform that's really team-based, NovoEd, I think. And
yeah.
They have some really nice team features, but it'd be great if I logged into edX, even without going into the course, and I saw a little bar that says, oh, your team members are online, and here's a little update or something, and we could only do that once you're in our LTI component, so it's quite limiting. And also, if you had these kind of features built in, then people might get used to them, and they develop a culture around how you collaborate. But that would also slow down the kind of innovation where right now every single MOOC is trying something new. So there's always.
So I think, like many people here, we're very interested in what means this concept of a MOOC. Where is MOOC going? What is MOOC? We know a lot of things that MOOCs are not going to be good at, and we know things that we still need to know more about. But one tantalizing idea would be a recurring MOOC. So if the same 8,000 people came back next year, and they found their MOOC waiting for them, and they found their user ID still active, and they found their design groups still, picking up where they left off, and they might have tried the lesson this year, and they come back into it, and that would be a new, direction for a MOOC as defining a professional community that could be like the world's longest running online, teacher party. And you come back in next year, and you're like, oh, this is so awesome. I'm actually traveling to France with my family, and we can stop and see you. So MOOCs, in that sense, could become a persistent online practitioner community that you're now designing interactions, you're now designing pedagogy, and you're now designing resources and, kind of function for that construct. That is very different from this kind of vestige of distributing knowledge from on high with some high-ranking prof that tells you videos, right? For us, I think this is really a frontier, and I think dance is at the, kind of taking that mantle as well. And I personally don't put a lot of faith in the kind of older construct of a MOOC, but I do have a lot of sense of, building value added to a person's professional practice and a person's ability to connect with others who are distributed and asynchronous. That's promising, and I think that some of the work we've done is at least nudging the concept of a MOOC in that direction, including the interaction spaces.
Yeah, I think one aspect of what you have done so far, which is fairly easy to get to, I think, is having students or participants inherit the material that earlier instantiations of the course have created. So that's I think the first way of making some kind of persistent course, and that should eventually kind of transition into a community that is more than just an online class. So I absolutely agree. So maybe as a last question for also people who watch the recording and want to get involved in the work that you've been doing. So is there anything besides the code you can make available to researchers, such as data from your courses, under any kind of IRB agreement or whatever you need to satisfy to share information, such as the communication between students? So if someone would be interested in analyzing communication between participants, is there anything that can be shared?
I think
or
that's
is
difficult.
Yeah. Privacy issues.
Anything other than aggregate data. I mean, we will share a lot more of the design. As I said, like there's a PhD thesis coming out. There are some papers underway, but the actual data is probably difficult. I would love to see this work, carried forwards, and I think if we or someone else had the chance to do something similar, maybe reusing some of the code, but actually build, not spending half the MOOC just building up the infrastructure, but having it up front and being a lot more thoughtful about, like if we had from the very first day a really nice dashboard of all these different groups and how they're working, which are struggling, and easy ways of sending out an email, jumping into group space and pushing things along. I feel like the success rate of these collaborative teams could probably have been doubled or tripled fairly easily. I think that would be a really interesting design space. I mean, both me and Jim are kind of transitioning to new institutions as well, so that's that brings both new opportunities, but it also makes it more difficult to
right. That's not easy in the first place. But
and it also complicates data access if that was ever a discussion.
So what I always thought is interesting, it would be something like, so I have that kind of data, I'm doing this with my data, but there are all these questions that people might ask, but I'm not working on those. So kind of putting those questions out there and for people to contact you about collaborations. Yes, so closer collaboration makes it easier to share than just getting the data out there, which is sometimes even impossible. So.
Right. What if the LTI community, the edX or developer community, had this kind of persistent online space that included interactions that were, stable, that included access to all of our code, that included design partnerships, that included research discussion boards, and I know Dance could carry that load if it wanted to. So maybe
something like so. Yeah, so in Twitter, you only can share IDs, but not the data. So if you have these IDs and permission to access the data, then you might be able to actually do
anybody's data, right? So that's just not going to happen. But we can certainly share code, and we can certainly co-develop, and we can certainly discuss and kind of help each other to make progress in what we're doing. And I think that honestly that these videos are great. They're an hour and 20 minutes, so you're going to have to really commit to watching them. But getting this kind of community that's really interested in this stuff actively, some sort of beacon where we can get drawn in and find each other and share and exchange and, ask our research questions, get feedback from the group. That's called knowledge community. That's my theoretical interest. I think that's at the heart of where you guys want to go with Dance. And I think that you have several people, between you, Oliver and Stian and others here, that would probably be really keen to kind of seed that and make sure that it got up and running. So I would urge you to think about MOOC as, BOOC and BOOC for MOOC that you could build together.
I think those are some great final words for the session. Thank you again for being here today and for introducing your great work. And I hope we can actually make this happen in the future. And Stian, good luck with.
I give you guys a lot of credit for organizing this. It's a really great just coming together of MOOC people. I mean, some of the MOOC platforms showing some interest of researchers that maybe initially were quite skeptical to this thing, but are now slowly starting to see it as an opportunity for research and design, and people who are building a technology. And I'm very excited to see where this goes and hope to contribute to it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.